When I was a kid, I took this test, and based on the results, I was qualified to join the GATE program. It's the Gifted Kid program for California. And there's all of these conspiracy theories floating around about if this was used as a way to test the psychic abilities of kids. But while researching all of this, I found something just as interesting that's actually verifiably real. Basically, it's the person who's the architects behind IQ testing and the psychometric testing of kids, and his name is Lewis Terman. Beyond his work on intelligence testing, Lewis Terman was an enthusiastic member of an organization that got California to sterilize 20,000 people, and whose research was used as evidence by Nazi Germany to justify mass sterilization, because this guy was a eugenicist. But I want to talk about whether this guy was legitimately evil or just held back by the limits of his time, and what happens if you take modern evidence to look at these crazy views that the guy had. I'm going to read you a quote by Lewis Terman. "This level of intelligence is very, very common among Spanish, Indian, and Mexican families of the Southwest, and also among black people. Their dullness seems to be racial, or at least inherent in the family stocks from which they come. Children of this group should be segregated into separate classes. They cannot master abstractions, but they can often be made into efficient workers. From a eugenic point of view, they constitute a grave problem because of their unusually prolific breeding." Now this is obviously problematic. But just for a second, let's talk about what Lewis Terman actually did for his work. He spearheaded the Stanford Binet test. So before that, there was the Binet intelligence test, but he improved it, and he made it perfect for finding people that are outliers. And in fact, he used this for the genetic studies of genius, which is this early research program that he ran for many, many years. And even after he died, he passed it on to other people. And I think even today, there's still a couple people still alive in the program. And the purpose of this program is to just look at a cohort of students with exceptionally high IQs based off of the Stanford Binet tests. Their average was in fact 150 IQ, and he took this collection of girls and boys and he watched what happened as they aged. He looked at how they went to college and got jobs, and to look for all of these markers of success. So those are the two main things that he did, and they're legitimately impressive. Even today, while the Wechsler test is used a lot for diagnoses, the Stanford Binet test is great for finding outliers, people that perform exceptionally well. And that program, that research we talked about, it is also still used today by people that are doing intelligence research, because it's just really one of a kind to look at people for that long. And I mean, this stuff wasn't all bad. Lewis Terman said that the reason he did his big study is to show that intelligent kids aren't necessarily handicapped socially or physically. And I think the research did show that, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And besides that, like I mentioned, he did include women in his cohort, which might have been a controversial idea at the time if they thought that men were all more intelligent. I think there were a little bit more boys than girls in the cohort, but the gender mix was relatively even. However, as I mentioned before, there were also issues with what he did. So the organization that he joined, that was a eugenicist organization, was started in Pasadena, California in 1928, and it's called the Human Betterment Foundation. And this organization they basically went to California and told them sterilize people, and California listened, sterilized 20,000 people. And in fact, because of the work of this organization chiefly, California is responsible for 1/3 of all of the sterilizations that happened in the United States. And as I mentioned near the beginning, Nazi Germany used this as justification, and also during the Nuremberg trials, where they said, well, why did you do this sterilization? They pointed a finger back at California and said, look at what they did, and based off of the work of the Human Betterment Foundation, all of their research. And I know I mentioned it was good how he included girls in his study, but this guy wasn't exactly a feminist. For example, he said that every feeble-minded woman is a potential prostitute, would hardly be disputed by anyone. Additionally, he came up with the masculinity-femininity psychometric testing. And what this does is it basically plots someone's traits and says either you're very masculine or feminine, following traditional norms. So if you go up to someone and they exhibit some traits that aren't stereotypically masculine, they say, oh, you have feminine characteristics. And you can imagine that the ways that was used weren't always for the best. But was the guy right at all? Well, going back to his cohort, which was admittedly just like 1,000 students out of maybe 100,000 like at that year, because they took maybe the top 1%. He actually missed the two Nobel laureates. Their names were William Shockley, that guy's famous, and Luis Alvarez. So the two people that actually achieved probably the greatest scientific achievement, probably a great marker for intelligence, were rejected from his cohort because of low IQ, or in his opinion, low intelligence. But at the same time, the cohort was pretty successful. Their rate of college graduation was 70% versus their peers at the time was only 8%. And on top of that, they made around twice as much once they graduated. So that top 1%, that whatever 150 IQ group, they did perform better, but they didn't perform the best. They didn't necessarily contain all of the standouts. And even when it comes to standouts within that cohort, the people that performed the best couldn't be discerned from the people that performed the worst based on IQ. So once you already go to that cohort, there's not really any more differences by looking at that variance of IQ. So IQ seems to be somewhat important, but less important than the guy predicted. And when it comes to Lewis Terman's claims about race, they've been basically entirely debunked. And in my opinion, the best evidence of that is looking at the difference between the performance of people of European descent and African descent, or Hispanic descent, whatever, over time. Because back when Lewis Terman was doing these tests, he found a large difference over a standard deviation for whatever math, reading performance, and I can pull up a graph just to show you these differences over time. But when it comes to today, as education has improved, as discrimination has maybe somewhat been tampered, we find that the difference in testing scores between these groups is getting smaller and smaller. And as that suggests, is that it wasn't actually inherent differences, where these groups work well as working class people, but can never be more than that. No, in fact, the issue was just the environment. And as that's being improved, so is their intelligences based off of these standardized tests, and we find that everyone is not so different after all. And this all makes just a little bit more sense if you think about Lewis Terman's upbringing. So this guy grew up on a farm, and he had a bunch of siblings. So I'm sure that in that environment, as this intellectual that sprung out of nowhere, he felt misunderstood, and he definitely wanted people to think of him as an intellectual. He thought that was very important. He skipped a couple grades in school, and he got lots of degrees, became a professor. And then when it came to doing his big study, as I mentioned before, the reason he said he wanted to do it was to prove that others that were like him were not so bad. But the problem was that this compassion, and he legitimately had compassion for these kids. He actually intervened, which probably goes against what you should do in a study. He intervened to help these kids, even when it would mess up with the results, because he just saw himself in them. But this compassion is conditional. It only applies to people that he thinks are like him. When it comes to people of other races, or people that he considers feeble-minded, then he will condone sterilization. And this is just really an unfortunate mindset to have, to be able to be so compassionate, to do this study in order to, help out that young version of himself, to do all of that, but then not to think that maybe other people of different types also deserve that same sort of recognition. It's just really unfortunate. And I don't know, it is kind of crazy to think about how the modern gifted program is based off of eugenics. It makes you wonder whether it's actually something good or not. Now, like I said, I did join the GATE program, but I didn't really go to many classes for it. I did some math testing thing with another guy in it, where we just sat in a room and did some math problems, but that was about it. If you guys have any more experience with it, let me know what that was like, and if you think it helped you, or if it socially stratified you, because I'm not really confident in these things based off of what they're built upon. And it is weird to think about how modern society is built off of all of these ethically dubious things, but hopefully we can just base them off of their results, and that the results are good. I feel like I'm rambling at this point, so I'll see you guys in the next video.